So hope everyone, I thank everyone for being here today. So the hard thing about being on a Friday, not just because it's a Friday, but having to follow up on some awesome presenters this week. So hopefully that it will be worthwhile your time spent here on Friday. And we're going to be talking about monitoring and assessing some multiplication. So as Dee said, I'm your host, Tonda Thompson, regional consultant here. And just a little bit of background information. I have been a classroom teacher for 16 years. Then the last 11 years, which I have a total of 27. After that, I spent 11 years as a math intervention teacher. That was the kind of the forming of the KCM, which was in 2006. And I've been with math recovery in KCM since that time, so since 2006. And the last part I see that I love to include is that I am a teacher learner forever. So I never feel that I am prepared enough. I feel like there's so much more out there that I can learn. So I love tuning in and learning from all of my colleagues and all of my friends across not just Kentucky, but across the U.S. So thank you for all of you who are here sharing with us today. This is our website. So if you are new to our sessions, then KCM, you can see us at kentuckymathematics.org. You will be able to see the videos of those sessions we have already hosted and other upcoming sessions as well. So our agenda today is we're looking at the research, the standards, major categories of assessment. We're going to look at the 6 types of formative assessment, and that's going to be a brief because the 2 that I'm going to focus most on will be the observations and the interviews. And then we're going to look at some progress monitoring. How do we progress monitor? Now that we have this data, what do we do with it? So I'm going to go quite fast because there's a lot of information here. And please stop if anyone has a question or comment. But the work that I'm going to share with you today comes from all the work of Jenny Bay Williams, John Vanderwall, and Dr. Bob Bright and his colleagues. So the things that I'm going to share with you today are coming from those 3 researchers there. And if you don't have these books, I highly recommend that you purchase those. Wonderful. They all kind of have a little bit of something different in them, but they complement one another very well. So just kind of a brief overview of just the multiplication and division standards, because that's what we have been discussing this week. And so again, my session is about the assessment part. So why do we assess students in mathematics? Anyone want to share out some reasons why we assess students in mathematics? Okay, a little bit different today than when I went to school. So one of the reasons, and those of you who, if you can see chat, Dee, any of you, let me know because I can't see the chat.
So a couple things are in the chat. And so folks have said to drive instruction to determine if students are making progress.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's very different from past reasons why we assess. Used to people would assess to see, did you master what I taught you today or last week? But you're exactly right. So why do we assess? It's to enhance the student learning, making instructional decisions, and providing feedback to students, whether they're doing well, where do they need to go next, so forth. So assessing kids today is very different than the way that we used to do that in the past. So when we think about assessment, Vanderwall talks about that assessment falls into 2 major categories. And we understand that, summative assessments and formative assessments. And we understand that summative assessment is that end of the year unit, that universal screener that we all use at the beginning and at the end to see where kids, if they have learned, if they have made growth, and that sort of information that summative assessment gives us. But we also, the really important thing is what I'm going to be sharing today and talking a little bit more about is the formative assessments. So how do we use formative assessments in our daily teaching of mathematics? Because formative assessment is that daily instructional assessing to see where kids are and where their growth, and like someone else said, to drive our instruction. So there were 6 types, according to Van de Waal, to the Teaching Student-Centered Mathematics book. There are 6 types of formative assessment. There's observations, questions, interviews, task, student self-assessment and reflection, and rubrics. And I think we're probably all familiar with all of those. But where does all this fit in? So the 2 I'm focusing our most attention on will be the observations and the interviews. And just because of time in 30 minutes, there's not a lot of time to get in depth with some of the other ones. But observations and interviews are 2 of the most important ones that I see that if we're going to get really good at something, maybe those are the 2 that we would focus on. So during the observation, there's 2 valuable results that will occur. Why is it? One is information that may have gone unnoticed. It's suddenly visible now. If you give a child just a multiple choice question or even a fill in the blank, sometimes there are lots of things that the child does that we wouldn't see. For example, I want to kind of give you a little bit of an example of one of the kids that I saw. There was one of the kids taking an end of the year assessment, and one of the problems on there was 20 plus 30. So I was watching as the kid was solving 20 plus 30 to see, and this was a first grade child, to see how they were solving that problem. I saw the child draw 20 tally marks, and not even in groups of 5, but 20 individual tally marks and 30 individual tally marks. And she went back and then she counted them all by ones. It's almost unheard of that she got it correct, but she did get the correct answer. So if just going by that summative test, we would think, well, she understands 20 plus 30. But it would take this observation to see that, look at the strategy that she used was not a very acceptable strategy at all, even though she got the correct answer. So observation is going to tell us a lot of those types of things. Also give us some information on how to do future planning, student conferencing, parent conferencing, which oftentimes is really nice to be able to share with the parent, not just, oh, well, they didn't do well on unit 6, they didn't pass that, but why did they not pass it? So those types of observations will be able to assist with that. Another part of an observation is the anecdotal notes. So when we take those anecdotal notes, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. How does the child, how did the child solve that 20 plus 30? How did they count from 1? And I think even Dee discussed that in her session on Tuesday about counting, and even we even stop counting. Maybe we start counting by ones and forward and backward when they're younger, but as they get older, we stop the counting. But maybe this child did drop back and count by ones, but that's important to know. So that's an observation that we need to see. And then how do we interpret that? Was the finger use, did they use the finger maybe to keep track of something? Maybe I have to do 3 10s. So this is 10, 20, 30, or would my fingers be 1, 2, 3? So even if they used fingers, it's really important for us to document how they use the fingers. So that's a really important observation for us as well. And then being able to decide, well, if they're still counting by ones, what's our next instructional move? Where do we go from here to get them to think of things as in chunks? And the other part of it, so when we think about anecdotal notes, that's all part of our observation. So we can take some anecdotal notes to put in their folder to kind of look back on, and also some checklist. So when we think of checklists, they are also part of that observation. Why do we use a checklist? Well, it's to help us focus attention, and it may be on some specific multiplication practices. You know, can they use equal groups? Can they use arrays? Can they use bare numbers? And you may just have this child with the checklist and you're checking them off. Yes, they can. Or you may have a list of skills that you're expecting them to know, and you have the whole class list. And that's what we're looking at here. So the first checklist is out of the Jenny Bay Williams book. It's the Math Fact Fluency here. And she has allowed us to share some of the multiplication checklists. So that will be in your copies that I'm sharing with you. But if you have not gotten this book, there's so much more in there than just some of the multiplication check sheets. There's games, this is a wonderful, wonderful resource as well. But I've listed those two types of checklists. If you notice, one is for the whole class, and the other one is just an individual checklist where it has the different skills or the different strategies that you expect the child to be able to do or to perform. And then you just give them and that individually. So we can look at that. Any questions thus far? I feel like I'm going pretty fast, but I've got a lot of stuff that I really think is good as we get into it. Okay. So, and then another observation tool is their strategy checklist. This too comes from the Math Fact Fluency from Jenny Bay Williams. And so this will also be in your handout. But those of you who did the book study with us, you should have all of these already. But if you don't, then we do have those available for you for the multiplication strategies and checklists and that sort of thing. So as you notice the difference between the one before and this one is that one of them deals with just the facts, and then this one's talking about strategies. So you may have the list of names already and you would use the checklist to do strategies, but be careful not to, just because you have a checklist and it has those foundational facts, it doesn't mean to use minute timings, flashcards, and that sort of thing. There's lots of work that has to be done, like they have talked about this whole week, before you get into that checking off with kids. Okay, so I do have a link in here to a video, and I have chosen to spend more time on a different video, but this is just, it's not actually multiplication division. It's just about observation and anecdotal records. And what does that mean and what does it look like? And it's actually a preschool classroom that they're taking notes. So it's in there and it's bedded for you to go back into, take a look at if you still have questions on checklist, anecdotal records, and that sort of thing. But I want us to move on to another part of formative assessment, which is the questioning. Questions are highly important, and we can either ask a high-level question or we can ask a low-level question, and that questioning is what guides us and guides the students to be able to increase that to that next level or that next strategy. So what I did find for you is, and I have those in the handouts as well, is there are questions and prompts that will engage and help them to use those mathematical practices. So I just listed one here for an example. So if you're wanting kids to make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, here are some questions that you can use for guidance. And so I have listed all of the math practices, the 8 practices, and with questions, good questioning to help move them forward, and helping with that as well. That's listed in the handouts. So let's move on to interviews. And this one has a lot of controversy, I think, because an interview is a diagnostic assessment, and it's usually one-to-one, and it takes more time. It's not one of those, let me just quickly give it to everyone, collect them, let me see if you can, or check mark. But it requires a little bit more time, which is a one-to-one, but the information that you get from an interview, in my opinion, is priceless. it's worth the time to do those interviews. So this is the part I wanted to spend a little bit more time on today. And I want us to take a look at an interview. And that interview is coming from Dr. Bob Wright's work, Developing Number Knowledge with the Math Recovery. And if you have been math recovery trained, you understand the importance of those interviews and how that when you design instruction, it comes from those interviews. So what I want us to do for the next, it's just about 5 minutes, is I want you to follow along, and would you just take a few notes? What do you notice about this child? And this is a parent-child, and the parent is actually a teacher, but he's practicing giving one of these assessments, one of these interviews. And just kind of take some notes on, what did you notice? What did you notice about the finger use? What did you notice about how they were solving the problems? Because that attending to the child is what the interviews are all about. And then once we gather that information, then we will be able to do some design instruction to better fit their needs. So if you will just have a paper, pen, something there to just take a few notes on what do you notice.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you do me a favor?
Yeah.
I want you to count by threes, and I want you to start at 3, and I'll tell you when to stop.
Can I sing?
No, you can just count.
3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, 27, 30.
Okay? Can you count by 4s, starting at 4, and I'll tell you when to stop.
4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, 40.
All right, very good. Can you count backward by 2? Start at 74, counting backward by 2, and I'll tell you when to stop.
74, 72, 70, 68, 66, 64, 62, 60, 58,
All right, very good. Count by 2s.
2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32.
All right, very good. Can you count by 5s?
5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60.
All right, very good. Can you start at 85 and count backward by 5s?
80, 75, 70, 65, 60.
All right, very good. Okay, here's what we're going to do now. I've got these counters here, okay? And using these counters, I want you to make 3 groups with 4 in each group. Okay, can you just spread those out, please? So you know. All right, and how many counters are there altogether?
Well, 3 times 4 is 12. So 12.
All right, very good. I'm going to take those counters away,
Okay.
and I'm going to show you something now.
Okay.
A picture, and I want you to answer some questions about this, okay?
Okay.
So what you have here is an array.
I like arrays.
I bet you do. And what we've got here is an array, and the dots on this card are in rows and columns, okay? And some of them have been covered, see?
Yeah.
So if we look at this just like that, how many dots are there all together?
35.
How do you know?
5 times 7 is 35.
Okay. I got a new one for you now.
Okay.
Okay. This one here, you can see that we have a set of 4, right? So on this card, there are 6 rows. Okay, see it?
24.
And then you ask the question.
But it's 24.
What if I asked you how many dots are in that row?
4.
How many dots are there all together?
24.
How do you know?
Because 6 times 4 is 24.
Okay, very good. Now, if you could answer the question for me,
Yes.
let's say you have 16 pencils,
Okay.
okay, and there are 4 friends. How many pencils would each child get?
4.
And how'd you get that?
16 divided by 4 is 4, and also the square root of 16 is 4.
Okay. Let's say I have 27 cupcakes,
Okay.
and I have to put them into packages that have 6 holders in them. How many packages do I need to hold my 27 cupcakes?
You need 5 packages
How so?
because if you have 4 groups of exactly 6,
hmm
but you need a box for your remaining cupcakes, because you're not just going to like leave them out in the open.
Okay, so those 4 boxes you talked about, how many cupcakes would I have in those?
6.
But how many would that be total?
Oh, 24.
Okay, and so then how many would I have left over?
3.
All right, very good. Okay, right here.
Mm-hmm.
If you know that 3 times 7 equals 21,
Mm-hmm.
how could you use that to help you solve 6 times 7?
Well, 6 times 7 is 21 plus 21 because the square root of 6, well, no, the square root of 6 is not 3, but they are, if you add 3 and 3, you get 6. So if you add the product of this equation, you double it because of these 2 numbers being add-ins. So if you add this one up twice, it'll get that. You just add those 2. Just add the product of 21 twice. You get 42, which is 6 times 7.
Okay.
Okay. So what did you notice there with the interview? And if you wouldn't care to unmute, we're all friends here. So if you wouldn't care to just unmute. Let's see.
She's good at forward multiplication, but going backwards, she has to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. And some facts more than others, right? Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer. Anything else? What else did you notice?
I noticed she was having to like get her fingers involved to get herself going there.
Okay.
Counting by ones, but I think she was having to really think about where she was going with those numbers.
It's like she was tracking
Yes.
with
And
the fingers.
yeah, and that goes back to what Dee was sharing with us on the importance of counting with multiplication. She shared that with us on Tuesday because getting into multiplication is using that composite thinking of skip counting. So that is a very early stage of multiplication. So in this assessment, that's what we're checking for. We're checking to see, can they do that composite counting, groups of, and it still may be a counting strategy, but that's very important part of that beginning multiplication. So did you see how the test was scaffolded? That it was getting more difficult as she was mastering. What did you notice about that part? The last task, it was lending itself to what? What were they checking for there? In that very...
It was seeing if she could do it with some left over.
Yeah, in that part, absolutely.
Could skip count and then have some left over.
Yeah, and did she have any support, any kind of markers to help her, meaning like the columns and rows? Because they went from having columns and rows to only rows, and then in that part, it was just completely verbal, right?
Listening to a story and answering.
Yeah.
Notice. She did pretty well keeping up with it.
Yeah, Yeah. And so
You're
what
welcome.
about that last task when it was like 3 times, I think it's 3 times 7 and 6 times 7? What are they looking for there to see if the child has?
If she has the doubling strategy or can decompose the 6 or the 7 to come up with, well, it would be the 6, given they gave 7 times 3 first.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that relationship that we want kids to get out. You know, if you know 3 times 7, does that help you with 6 times 7? What's that relationship? Like you said, it's that doubling. Do you know the relationship? She used the square root a lot. Why do you think that was the case? Do you think maybe that was the last thing they did in math class? They worked on the square root because she wanted to pull back to, and then she said, no, that didn't work. That square, but it did the first time. But then she's like, no, that didn't work. But so she really wanted to use that. And the kids will do this a lot of times. They'll fall back to whatever it was the last thing that they had practiced in class.
Or if it's something they think is super cool, and there are kids that think square roots, if I, doubling is cool, square roots are cool, let me go there.
You're exactly right. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. So when I think of interviews, how important they are extremely important. So and if you have Developing Number Knowledge, the book of Dr. Wright, and again, I mean, I don't make anything off of these books. They're just really important part. He has a lot of the interview assessments in here, and also some activities to go along. If they're struggling here, here's some things that you could work on to help with that. So even if you're not AVMR trained, you can still use the book for a lot of things. Another site, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, some of you may or may not be, I want to share with you, is the Boulder Valley School District Math Screeners. Now, they are a big AVMR school and have been for many, many years. And so they have taken what is a lengthy interview assessment, and they have turned it into screeners, meaning they screen 3 times a year. And I want to share that with you. And if you will just Google Boulder, and it's here in the PowerPoint too. I have it embedded, but I just pulled up the fall screener so you could kind of take a look at it. They do have kindergarten through 5th grade. So I'm going to pull up a beginning 4th grade math screeners, and they have everything that you need on here to give this screener at the beginning of the year. It's very quick. Sometimes it takes less than 2 minutes. Sometimes it takes a little longer. I've given 1st grade to all the 1st grade children when I was the math interventionist, and it doesn't take long at all to give that. But I want you to take a look at the 4th grade to kind of give you an idea. And if you see here, there's that counting again. You know, counting is very important part of multiplication. So you're going to see that they ask you to start counting from 986 and you stop them at 1000. And then you give them their correct and fluent, or they're correct but they're uncertain. They've got some hesitation there, or they're unsuccessful. They're doing some backward counting here. You also see the multiplication. There's 2 problems on multiplication division. It tells you to place out 6 cards with dots face down without allowing the student to see the dots. And those cards are here too for you to print out. And then it tells you what to say. I have 6 cards. Each card has 3 dots on it. How many dots are there altogether? And then you give them a score. And then you ask them, write an equation to go with the dots on the card. And you give them paper and pencil, and you see if they can do that as well. There's also some on place value here. And for 4th grade, there's also a fraction part. So this is something, so they have them for fall, winter, and spring for kindergarten through 5th grade. So this will kind of, if you have some kids who are really strugglers, then this kind of gives you an opportunity to do some further assessment with them. Oh, sorry. Okay, any questions on that? I'm going to kind of go quickly because I'm time's sake and it's on a Friday. Okay, so I'm not going to talk too much about the task. There's the writing part, student self-assessments. All of those are still parts of that formative assessment. There's a rubric. You can get on there and kind of, we all are familiar with rubrics, but that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea there. So what after you give the assessment? I love this piece. And two of our past RCs came up with this based on the work from, we call the Red Book. So this is something that our KCM regional consultants came up with. And if you notice there, it kind of gives you an idea, where would you place the kids? And you could put your kids, if they're still working just in grouping things, we call that a construct 0, but you don't have to worry about that. But their name would go here. They still have to put things in equal groups. If they're still just in the skip counting page or skip counting phase, then let's list their names here. If they can do, they have to still have those markers visible. They still need to see the rows and the columns before they can answer how many altogether, then they go here. And if you see that we continue to progress until where they can just do bare number task. So this is a worksheet you could take from the assessments and then list the kiddos here so you can put them into groups. This is a progress monitoring. It's pretty much the same thing as you just saw, but without this has got the visuals, this one doesn't. So with multiplication division, you can see here that you can give them this 3 times and you place them where they fall on this continuum. So if they count by ones and they're not able to do equal shares, then they would be here. But maybe they're getting closer to 1, or maybe they're here at 3. They can stress and skip count non-visible items, and represents and perception mark. Could that, if you even notice, that says end of second too. But maybe they're here working here. You just place a mark. And one of the things that some of our teachers do is they put these in 3 different colors. So maybe red is the fall of the year. So your red mark will tell where they are fall of the year. Then winter, you may use a blue pencil. So blue now shows the progress, and then you may choose black or some other color. So this is just a progress monitoring document or instrument that you could also use for that. Okay. Sorry that I had to rush through, but it's 30 minutes is just not enough. I could talk all day about it. But next week, and take some more, you can, like I said, the PowerPoint's here for you. So take a look at it. If you need to look at it more in depth, or if you have questions, you know, I'm right here. Next week, it looks like we've got a great lineup again for you, but we're focusing on fractions. So we would love to have you to join us again the same time next week. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And I appreciate your time. And it's on a Friday. So thank you so much for sticking with me on a Friday, a beautiful sunny Friday afternoon. So hopefully I didn't keep you over too much. Any questions?
It seems as though people loved that school district resource that you shared. What a beautiful one-stop shopping where someone's really thought through that. And of course, we are so thankful that you share your really deep understanding of assessment and monitoring. It's what you've done so well over all these years. We'd love for some of you guys to unmute and tell Tonda what was your favorite part about this afternoon's session.
I like that she brought forth the importance of the one-on-one interviews with the students. I try to express that with my teachers. They want me to give that VVSD screener, and I don't mind doing that. But if those teachers will give that to their students, they can see the one-on-one connection there. They can see where those kids are. It's hard for me to tell them.
Yes, it's just
Thank
so.
Tonda.
Yeah, it's just it's not the same if we give them versus if they give them, because we can give them and give them to them, but they won't look at them again. I've done all that and I've tried it. But they need to really see the thinking that goes. It's not about a score. It's about the thinking and that observation on how those kids get those answers.
The person designing where the lesson is supposed to go next should be the person giving the assessment, right? Because they're the person that's going to have to change whatever or not change whatever they're doing with the student. So it does make sense. Yep.
That indeed is the philosophy from here at the Kentucky Center for Mathematics. It's deep. It's the deep relationships and the deep understanding that you have about your child that's really going to help you to move the students. So time is that commodity where we just begin to think about it differently. And so we encourage you to think deeply about how children are thinking, and then you can really move them in the direction that you want them to do. I like that Lisa Riggs calls it practice kid watching, and kid watching makes a difference. We want to thank you for joining the Kentucky Center for Mathematics. This week has been developing multiplicative thinking, and we want to thank all of our hosts, and especially want to thank Tonda today. Great session. Really enjoyed learning from you today. We'll see you next week. Remember, next week is about fractions. Happy Friday.
Bye-bye.